Так дайте пацанам посчитать потери. Суммы нули погибают на сцене. Снова один, прогуляюсь без тени. Заливаю лид, поцелуй на шее. Капли дома, правый назад, черный каскад. Вижу твой взгляд, степ на гояр. Мог тебя взять, но ты не моя. Так дайте пацанам посчитать потери. Суммы нули погибают на сцене. Снова один, прогуляюсь без тени. Заливаю лид, поцелуй на шее. Капли дома, правый назад, черный каскад. Вижу твой взгляд, степ на гояр. Мог тебя взять, но ты не моя. Hey, babe. Эти понты покупались во рту. Твои мозги затупились к утру. Так дайте пацанам посчитать потери. Суммы нули погибают на сцене. Снова один, прогуляюсь без тени. Заливаю лид, поцелуй на шее. Как дома, правый назад, черный каскад. Вижу твой взгляд, степ на гояр. Мог тебя взять, но ты не моя. Так дайте пацанам посчитать потери. Суммы нули погибают на сцене. Снова один, прогуляюсь без тени. Заливаю лид, поцелуй на шее. Как дома, правый назад, черный каскад. Вижу твой взгляд, степ на гояр. Мог тебя взять, но ты не моя. Так дайте пацанам посчитать потери. Суммы нули погибают на сцене. Снова один, прогуляюсь без тени. Заливаю лид, поцелуй на шее. Капли дома, правый назад, черный каскад. Вижу твой взгляд, степ на гояр. Мог тебя взять, но ты не моя. Так дайте пацанам посчитать потери. Суммы нули погибают на сцене. Снова один, прогуляюсь без тени. Заливаю лид, поцелуй на шее. Капли дома, правый назад, черный каскад. Вижу твой взгляд, степ на гояр. Мог тебя взять, но ты не моя.
I'm kind of curious what both of you, Tyler and Caleb, think about Trump and his next, bid to become president. And do you expect a lot of CPI members to end up in the Trump camp? I mean,
great question.
Laura, you kind of mentioned like MAGA communism,
right?
As
it's a thing.
Nonprofit, we don't endorse any candidate. We don't campaign for anyone. We simply carry out educational socialist meetings, and we educate people about socialism and anti-imperialism. We don't endorse any candidate.
Yeah, well, what I'm kind of getting at is it's sort of like as I said in the beginning, the People's Party, a populist party with conservative beginnings, now getting people from the left attaching themselves or migrating over to the party because of civil liberties issues. And I know that a lot of Bernie supporters ended up supporting Trump in 2016. Do you see that same sort of dynamic in play here again as we approach the next election?
I mean, I think that Joe Biden has made clear that you're with him or against him. And I think the reason that we're seeing this, I remember back during the Bush years, at the protests against the war in Iraq, you would see the Libertarian Party. I remember Alex Jones. That's when I first saw Alex Jones.
You bet.
He wasn't super famous like he is now, but he was walking around at the Iraq war
we did a
protests.
big one in Austin with Alex Jones to protest the Iraq war.
Right, and he's a right-winger, but because he was against the neocons that were running the Republican Party, that were the establishment, he got shoved into the same tent as, oh, you're part of the people that are against Bush. You're the left. And I think that now that Joe Biden and the Democratic Party and the woke synthetic left are becoming the main line of U.S. imperialism, that, you know, left critics of the American establishment and right-wing critics of the American establishment are increasingly being shoved into the same camp. You know, and that doesn't mean that there aren't deep ideological differences between such groups, but they are against the status quo. And that, you know, during the late Cold War, after Richard Nixon, you know, came into the presidency, you had like what I call the late Cold War normal, where the Republicans were the hardline party, Reagan, Nixon, Bush, and the Democrats were kind of the loyal opposition who criticized it. And now what we're seeing is, as the U.S. society is in a big crisis, that's flipped, and now the Democrats are becoming very much the party that is, you know, the mainstream party. And it looks like, I think, and I actually do predict, and this is maybe weird, you know, I wish my best to the People's Party. I like what they're doing and such in the United States, but honestly, I think there's a really good chance that, give it time, it won't happen immediately. But I'm almost wondering if in a decade or so we might have a Republican Party that's just kind of a catch-all populist anti-establishment party.
That's kind of what Trump started, you know, that's what he was trying to build when he basically did a hostile takeover of the GOP, kicked out the neocons from power, and the MAGA people took over the Republican Party. But my question for you is, do you have some Trump supporters in CPI?
Well, I mean, I think there are people in CPI that voted for Trump, you know. I mean, I
could give my thoughts
about that. So, you know, there are people, I mean, you know, Tyler campaigned for Obama, you know, I mean,
I'm surrounded by Trump supporters everywhere. My mom, well, I shouldn't, but you get what I'm saying. Dad, I think we can put Dad in. Actually, this is the politics where I'm at. My dad, when he went to vote, he wouldn't mind me telling this story. The sheriff was in front of him, and they were voting for Hillary Clinton. And some other guy he didn't like behind him was voting for Donald Trump. And my dad goes, screw it, I hate both of you. I'm voting for Jill Stein. So he literally made up his mind in the line. Okay.
That's great.
So that's my dad. I will just tell you my and your audience, Maverick News audience, hear this from a conservative communist. The depth of my hatred for Justin Trudeau, for Joe Biden, for Hillary Clinton, for Victoria Nuland is so deep and pure that I must turn to Christianity and pray for their souls. Okay.
Solidarity
I
with
pray
that.
for them to find Jesus because I'm afraid of myself if I don't. Okay.
Yes.
I pray that they find the Lord. I pray for you, Nancy Pelosi. Obviously, God's on your side with your stock choices. So maybe he can be on your side with, you know, your foreign policy choices as well, or your neoliberal crash the economy. Anyway, so, you know, that being said, I love to see Trump make him go crazy. I love it.
Oh,
it
me
makes
too.
Me happy.
Me too.
Okay?
Did you see what Trump said about the war just yesterday?
I love it. No, Chomsky said it. He's the only anti-war voice in the upper crust of American politics.
Here, I'll show you. If you haven't seen it, this is like 30 seconds of yesterday, I believe. This is in West Palm Beach.
What are you going to do to stop the war in Ukraine?
So I would literally start calling, not from the day I took over, but from the night I won. And I called two people. You know who the two people are? Putin, right? You know who Putin is? And Zelensky. And I'd say, we're going to meet. We're going to meet. And I guarantee I could work that out. I guarantee. I know exactly what I'd say, by the way. I know exactly. I tell one guy this, and I tell one guy that, and I say, you better make a deal. We would have a deal made in 24 hours.
What are you going to do to stop the war?
Well, look, Trump is selfish. Trump is a selfish politician, and because he's selfish, he's not, playing ball the way he's supposed to. He wants to be remembered as a great president. He wants his ego to be I guess flattered and supported. And I think a lot of the good things Trump did when he was president were done for that reason, that he's just too egotistical to be a team player for US imperialism. When he went to North Korea and met with Kim Jong-un, that was an amazing moment. That was a huge step forward. And we know now that while Mike Pompeo was for it, that John Bolton was trying to sabotage it. And John Bolton admits this. He's written a book saying so, saying that he was trying to sabotage it. And while the negotiations were in the works, the Spanish, the embassy of North Korea in Spain was raided. Did you hear about this? And it was all over the news in Spain that all kinds of people that the Spanish mainstream media said were linked to American intelligence, linked to to American corporations and businesses, broke into the North Korean embassy and stole computers and smashed the place. And that was like an effort to try and derail the talks. John Bolton gave an interview where he said, with North Korea, Libyan options are on the table, meaning that they would do to Kim Jong-un what was done to Gaddafi. And John Bolton admits he was trying to sabotage and prevent Trump from making peace on the Korean Peninsula. Well, do I think that Trump was trying to make peace on the Korean Peninsula because he's just a good guy? No, but Trump wanted to be remembered as a great American leader. One thing that struck me about Donald Trump is I feel like, when Donald Trump was a young guy, Nixon was president. And in some ways, the Trump presidency was this weird attempt to reenact the Nixon presidency, right? Because what did Nixon do? He went to China and he met with Mao. So Trump went to North Korea. He met with Kim Jong-un. Also, what did Nixon do? He called himself the law and order candidate. Donald Trump called himself the law and order candidate. Nixon said he spoke for the silent majority. Trump says he spoke for the silent majority. Roger Stone, who was a big part of Trump and his campaign, was also a big part of Nixon and his campaign. And I feel like, maybe when young Donald Trump had presidential aspirations and was, in his mind writing, what will I do when I be president? He was looking at then President Richard Nixon and thinking, I can be like that someday or something. The parallels there are kind of interesting.
It was an interesting hybrid, sort of like a hybrid Nixon-Reagan, tack that he took.
I mean, Reagan, I see in a little bit of a different light. I mean, Reagan, maybe in the sense of like the Reagan campaign and how Reagan was kind of leading a revolt against Carter, right? And you could see that as kind of the Obama administration and Brzezinski and some of their policies, like, he was riding that same kind of reaction among the business community against, some degrowth and bad economic management. But the other thing is that, let's remember that Nixon was impeached. Right. And I mean, he wasn't, he resigned before the impeachment process continued. But if you look at that, part of the reason that Nixon was impeached was that he got to be too powerful. Nixon was brought into office because they needed a strong man to get the country back in order, because the students were protesting the Vietnam War. The black community was in revolt. The USA was losing in Vietnam, and they needed somebody to come in there and just bring the hammer down. And so Nixon did, in the service of American capitalism and imperialism. He escalated the Vietnam War. And then when it became clear they couldn't win, he pulled out. Right. Nixon, the previous administrations, Ramsey Clark, who I used to work for, had been trying to restrain the FBI. Nixon came in there. He fired Ramsey Clark. He said to the FBI, go get them. He let the FBI go after the Black Panthers and crush them. Nixon was a ruthless strongman, and he brought the United States back into order. He ended the political crisis. He brought young people back into mainstream politics, lowered the voting age to 18. He did a lot of dramatic things to try and stabilize the United States. And then he succeeded. And then the very forces that brought him into office removed him, because they don't like the strongmen, these Bonapartists. Bonapartists are a lot like dentists. You don't like going to the dentist, but you do it when you have to, right? And that they bring in these kind of strongman authoritarian leaders to try and save their system. But at the end of the day, the rich and powerful don't want anyone who can say no to them. And that in order to do what he did, there was a TV show on TV when Nixon was president called All in the Family. And the hero was Archie Bunker. Archie Bunker was a working class guy, right? And Nixon had this layer of working class guys who backed him. And Richard Nixon, let's remember, he advocated up into his second term, he was calling for a guaranteed minimum income for all citizens. Did you know this? And he wanted to give every family with children, he wanted to give them a cash income. Well, I mean, like other than Andrew Yang, nobody calls it.
It was an attempt at UBI. That's correct.
Yeah, and that he was happy to unleash neoliberal economics on Chile after the coup, that happened. But he was not willing, he kicked Milton Friedman out of the White House. Milton Friedman was his economic advisor for the first year. And then the economy tanked and he said, we're all Keynesians now. And he booted Milton Friedman out of there. And he imposed the Nixon shocks, a wage freeze, a price freeze. He imposed the Nixon shocks and took dramatic economic moves to stabilize the economy. And when he was ousted, that presidency that came after him, Gerald Ford, the president no one ever voted for, Gerald Ford. Gerald Ford, first of all, what did he do? He brought Ayn Rand to the White House along with her protege, Alan Greenspan. And it's Gerald Ford who got us Alan Greenspan. And it's also Gerald Ford who got us Dick Cheney and Donald Rumsfeld. And neoliberalism got a huge boost when Nixon was ousted. And that, Nixon, because he was an authoritarian strongman and because he was like Trump, he was a selfish politician. He wasn't willing to play ball with neoliberal economics, despite being a conservative. And he was replaced with Gerald Ford, who very much would do that. So Nixon was somebody who was somebody who came in to save capitalism. He did it, and then they removed him in order to bring in somebody who would help grind the country into poverty. And
you know why they removed him? Because he was looking into that whole Bay of Pigs thing.
That'll do it.
We know what that means, don't we?
They got 6 ways from Sunday to get rid of you, Lori Spencer.
Exactly.
I would just like to say about Trump, I love that he pisses off the libs. But I don't think he's got the answers for how to fix things. That's the thing, is I appreciate he makes their heads explode. I love that. I pray their heads don't explode, right? But you get what I'm saying. But then I woke up in the middle of the night the other night. I'm a school teacher. I make $35,000 a year. Okay. Missouri just passed some law to, they raised the base pay to $38,000 a year. So I actually got an extra paycheck. God provided. That's the main way I was able to get to the anti-war rally this weekend. But I wake up, I look through my YouTube feed. Donald Trump's on Forbes. Something about education. So I click on it. And Donald Trump is just spitting hot fire about how the school teachers in this country, we're going to get them straight. We're going to take away their tenure. Well, I'm pretty sure the history of tenure in America was McCarthyism, right? So,
Good point.
I'm making $35,000 a year. You teach 5 years, you get that little bit of stability. You get to keep a teacher like me in the classroom. You guys think about it. Think about your English teacher. Who do you think would be more fun to be in a classroom with? Okay. I just hate to say it. We're reading 1984 in my journalism class, and I'm relating it to every single thing happening in the news right now. They're memory hall. We watched Biden's speech. And then I said, did you guys notice he just memory hold every single thing that's happened in the Donbass for the past 10 years? How about you didn't mention that once?
Oh, so he was just lying like a rug in that speech.
And Donald Trump's going to replace my tenure with merit-based pay. Now, who's going to decide the merit? You're going to pay me based off test scores? These tests are a joke. A joke. And the thing is, you want to blame the school teachers, Donald. There's never been any litter boxes in my bathroom, and maybe in urban areas of the country. We'll focus on urban areas then. Go in the Democratic strongholds and clear them out. But in the rural America, look at my fancy studio. Look at this. Look at this. Isn't it fancy? Look, there's fertilizer back here. I'm in the basement of the bank, like this rented apartment that I live. Okay. I got 2 kids. My wife's upstairs. We just bought pizza. Thank God I could afford it. All right. And you want to go after me, Donald? Donald, I can make twice. I work on the weekend as a pharmacy tech at Walmart and make videos about it on my YouTube channel. So I can somehow pay off the $60,000 debt that I got to get a master's degree in journalism from the University of Missouri. Not a good career choice, Rick, if you want to make money. If you get lucky, but you can
you're right.
Scream into the void. But I could drive a truck. I should join the truckers. I'd make twice as much money.
Hell yeah, you would.
But here's my analysis why Donald Trump does that. He wants to go after people like Nancy Pelosi. He wants to go after rich Democrats in the suburbs, but they got money. And he knows that's going to be very difficult. He wants to go after the media. He would love to go in MSNBC and just make their lives a living hell, but he can't do that. So he like reaches around for like, what profession can I go after that's kind of like Democrats? Ooh, teachers.
Teachers.
Let's turn the screws on
unions.
teachers.
The teachers' unions are so strongly
and it's obvious,
Democratic.
like, dude, we're trying to get a teachers' union going. It's not easy. It's not
Missouri,
easy.
I'm sure it ain't.
Like, most people are like, nope. Most teachers are like, nope. I get summers off. I ain't got no interest in a union. 35 grand is fine for me. I mean, it's an uphill battle. So that's the thing with Donald. I love that he pisses off the libs, but I don't think he's got the answers of how to fix the problems for the working class in America. And I think Caleb does. If you listen to Caleb, if you listen to our 4-point plan that we put out through the CPI, that's how to give the working class what they want in this country. And dare I say, some of the communists have the ideas about what you want. Okay? God created the earth. God put the oil in the ground. And I don't think on the 8th day he said, all right, Mr. Rockefeller, you can have all of it.
So true. And, I just wanted to play this very brief 60-second clip of President Kennedy because something Caleb said really rang a bell with me. And he's absolutely right that, if a president doesn't please the deep state, they remove him. Through Nixon, it was impeachment. Trump, they impeached him twice. They didn't remove him, but they impeached him twice, once on the way out the door. Same with Bill Clinton, impeached but not removed from office. But, they find a way to destroy you, whether it's through character assassination, impeachment, or in the case of President Kennedy, actual assassination. You have to ask yourself, why did they take it to that extreme with the Kennedy brothers? And the president of the United States, John Kennedy, later his brother, Senator Robert Kennedy, when he was challenging Nixon in 1968 for the presidency, why didn't they just use all that sexual blackmail that Hoover had on JFK to destroy him? Why didn't they find something to impeach him over? Why did they go to the ultimate extreme of assassination in broad daylight, high noon, on a Dallas street, so that the whole world could see it? And they wanted the whole world to see it. And when they came back to Washington that night, his wife, the First Lady, Jacqueline Kennedy, refused to change her little pink dress, which was smeared with the blood of her husband. And many times on the flight back to Washington from Texas, she was asked, would you like to change your blood-stained clothes? And she said, no, I want them to see what they did to Jack. What they did to Jack. And so here's 60 seconds of a speech that President Kennedy gave to the United Auto Workers Union. This was May 8th of 1962, was when he was having that confrontation with Big Steel, because they were trying to increase steel prices, which would have completely tanked the economy. And he was fighting back against the most powerful interests in America.
The President of the United States, and who believed that the President of the United States should be the honorary chairman of a great fraternal organization and confine himself to ceremonial functions. But that isn't what the Constitution says. And I did not run for President of the United States to fulfill that office in that way. Harry Truman once said there are 14 or 15 million Americans who have the resources to have representatives in Washington to protect their interests. And that the interests of the great mass of the other people, the 150 or 60 million, is the responsibility of the President of the United States. And I propose to fulfill it.
It's too close to what the people wanted, Lori.
I also understand he wanted to make the moon mission a joint operation between the Soviet Union and the United States. And he proposed combining the space programs, which would have been a huge step toward peace in the world. And yeah, that would have been amazing.
That's what I think it was. He wanted to make peace with the Soviet Union.
The other thing that's interesting is, at that time, you have to remember, so, this was what they call the post-World War II economic expansion, which is the greatest episode of economic growth in all of human history. At the Soviet Union, the communist countries, they were all rebuilding from World War II. In Western Europe, they were having social democracies where they were enacting free healthcare and, free education and such. And across the third world, many of the U.S. aligned governments, were these kind of military dictatorships that were aligned with the United States. And the Kennedy administration, they saw, like, for example, the leader, Syngman Rhee in South Korea, he was overthrown. There was an uprising against him because South Korea was still very poor. And so the Kennedy administration and later the Johnson administration, they arranged for Park Chung-hee to become the new military dictator. And he started economically developing the country. And the Shah of Iran, who was a U.S.-backed dictator, the Kennedy administration basically forced him to have something called the White Revolution, to start redistributing land, to give women the right to vote, etc. And the Kennedy administration basically said, in order to fight communists, we have to allow countries to kind of build themselves up economically. We have to create a space for countries like South Korea, for countries like Iran to have their own economy so they don't have communist revolutions. And that was a more effective strategy. And, the creation of the Peace Corps, that's Kennedy's credited for doing that. That was also part of that. Hugo Chavez talked about when he was a kid, the Peace Corps volunteers taught him to play basketball in his neighborhood in Venezuela. They came to his neighborhood, and that creating the Peace Corps, allowing U.S. aligned countries to kind of build up their infrastructure, that was his way of fighting the communists. That doesn't make as much money for the military industrial complex as just bombing the shit out of countries. It's actually
just like Jesus wanted.
Yeah, it's actually quite expensive. And for years, I believe in the New York Times, there was a columnist throughout the 70s and 80s that was always saying, why can't we be the communists? In Nicaragua, the communists are teaching people to read. They're opening free healthcare clinics. The way to defeat communists is we have to be the communists. We have to teach people to read. We have to provide healthcare to people. We have to help these countries develop. And if we could just do what the Soviets did, then no one would want to be communist. Well, the reason that they don't do it is because of capitalism and imperialism. It's not set up to function that way. But that was kind of the Cold War liberal attitude, is that if we can really live out our liberal principles, we can stop the communists from expanding. And I think Kennedy really believed that to some degree or other. He wasn't a communist, but he believed that. You have to also remember that, Kennedy's administration came not very long after Roosevelt. And Roosevelt had been elected 4 times. If I'm not mistaken, there was an interview with I think it was Bobby Kennedy, where he was interviewed, and they asked Bobby Kennedy, do you believe in term limits? Because after Roosevelt had died, then they enacted term limits. So now only 2 terms for a president. Mm-hmm. And Bobby Kennedy said, oh, sure, I believe in term limits. And my brother Ted, he believes in term limits also. And he started just naming off his relatives, and they believe in term limits. And this other guy believes in term limits. And that was the thing. The Kennedys, if they wanted to, they could keep running the United States as a political dynasty for a long time. And that I think ultimately what scared them the most was that Kennedy positioned himself as an ally of the civil rights movement. Because what made Roosevelt so powerful was that he had positioned himself as an ally of the labor unions. It was his alliance with the labor unions, with the Communist Party, that had gotten him that energy and gotten him that ability to do all kinds of things that scared the ruling class. So Kennedy, this new president, comes along. He's the first Catholic president, and he comes in, and he's, got a different attitude about how to fight the commies. And then on top of that, when it gets down to it, he's positioning himself as aligned with this protest movement. I think the ruling elite of the United States said, this guy's got to go. This guy's got to go.
That's right. And, I just wanted to say, because you brought up term limits and the 22nd Amendment, just this week, I ran a poll on Twitter asking if we should repeal the 22nd Amendment, if it was a mistake. As you probably know, in 1947, the Congress, which was controlled, finally, the Republicans won Congress back after a generation of the Democrats having a firm control over both the White House and the Congress. But in 1947, that changed. And 2 years after the death of Roosevelt, they passed the 22nd Amendment instituting a 2-term limit for presidents to ensure that we never had another FDR and that the Republicans would never be out of power again for a generation. So to me, it seems very anti-democratic to have term limits, both on the presidency and on Congress. I'm against term limits because I believe that subverts the will of the electorate.
What if you get a good guy in there?
Exactly. I mean, let's look at this from a private business. If you run a business,
get rid of Steve Jobs.
You want to get rid of Steve Jobs after 8 years?
You're out, Elon.
You want to get rid of your best guy after 8 years? I mean, you want to sign that guy to a lifetime
maybe Bill
contract.
Gates, though. I'm for it in the case of Bill Gates.
And that's literally what the American people did with FDR. FDR was supported by a vast majority of the electorate, not just Democrats. Republicans voted for him as well. He always won by very large margins. He was clearly the choice of the people. At that time, they felt he was the right leader for the United States, and they gave him an unprecedented 4 terms in office. Now, granted, it's been a very long time since we had a president that the vast majority, Republicans and Democrats, could agree was great for the country and wanted to keep him. I can't even think of the last time that that any candidate or president had that kind of support. But like you said, Tyler, what if we get a good guy or a good gal in that office? What if we get a Wallace or a Kennedy or someone we actually want to keep? So I asked, I threw the question out there just out of curiosity, polled about 300 people.
I want to interview Rick. Rick's got that great broadcast face.
Doesn't
He's
he,
the
though?
strong, silent type.
He is.
You see those
Not
wheels
always
just turning. Maybe it's because you talk so much on the other part, Rick. You just sit back and listen.
I'm Canadian.
Let me tell you,
so
journalists here.
I listen a lot, and don't.
We got to get
much.
Rick in there. What's your thoughts, Rick?
Well, I mean, I'm pretty conservative, so I'm sitting here with 3 pretty
silent judgment,
left wingy kind of people. So I'm a little outnumbered. I'm a little afraid of you because I'm afraid you might change my mind about things.
Oh no! I promise I won't.
You know, I have concerns about coercion. I like people to be able to make their own choices, do things voluntarily. I do believe in the free market. But I share a lot of your concerns about people being left behind and things of that nature. But I view all economies around the world as being hybrid systems. There's no pure free market. There's nothing pure anywhere really. And I see more similarities between countries than things that are different. So I'm sort of, I view myself as being kind of middle of the road, but maybe pretty conservative in a lot of ways.
I get you.
You know, but I get very concerned about communism, anything authoritarian, because I see that if through government programs and regulation, there's always coercion, and that can lead to a very bad place. And I think we've seen that during the pandemic and the attitude the government took toward vaccinations. You know, it's I'm responsible for the protection of everyone around me instead of being responsible for myself as an individual. So to me, it's upside down when you start getting into that kind of thinking. I get really worried about it. So I sit back and I listen to what you guys have to say, but I'm really more interested in listening to absorb than, people on this show listen to me talk all the time. So I'm happy to have you guys share your thoughts.
I never want to engage in an argument at all because I'm still figuring this stuff out myself. But I do like to share like kind of light bulb moments I had, and Caleb helped with a lot of those. You know, with like coercion, it's like the way Marx looks at it is as long as there's scarcity, people are going to fight over stuff, you know, and it's kind of like as long as people are fighting over stuff, there's probably going to be a government of some kind, I feel. And that government, in a way, is going to be coercive in some way. But the Marxist idea, as well as I understand it, and Caleb can help me out, is that there's going to be one of two classes in charge of that government. In America, the bourgeoisie is in charge of our government. Or if you don't like that term, the ultra wealthy, the Davos crowd is in charge of the government. And they will crush the 99% if need be to keep
crushing us right now.
To keep my student loan payment coming, baby, because we never even touched that principle in 10 straight years. And they like it that way, Tyler. Pat you on the head. Let's get all you smart little people in debt forever. Okay, it's a good business model. We don't create bullet trains or anything like that. But, hey, our pockets keep getting full. And I like that the communists are just straight with it. If you read page 1 of the Chinese constitution, it says we are a dictatorship of the proletariat. And that sounds terrifying until you learn what it is. And that means everybody in Davos, listen up. There's a new game in town, y'all. The 99% is now in charge, and we will crush you if need be if you try to screw up our lives by kicking us off our little family homes, okay? Or enslaving us in debt forever, okay? Or making us use your satanic digital currency. We've got a nice prison cell for you. Okay.
Hell yeah.
That's the dictatorship of the proletariat.
And isn't that the same thing as we the people?
We the
Doesn't
people.
that mean
the government
the same
of the
thing
people,
that's in
by
our
the people, and
Declaration
for
of
the people.
Independence?
Ain't no Bill Gates gonna screw up my kid's life, and I will die to prevent you from doing it to me, Bill Gates. Me and Jesus Christ will. Okay? So Jesus gets me out of bed in the morning. Jesus helps me pray for Nancy Pelosi. And Marxism gives me the materialist tools to build the government that will prevent Bill Gates from driving my teenage daughter to suicide. Just as, like, what is it? 1 in 3 girls with a social media account want to kill themselves. Did you guys see that article?
Wow.
So, you know, and Marx actually had a way to start to eliminate scarcity, which I think China's kind of doing. You set the means of production free, right? And Caleb, you take it from there, because I'm going to start getting out of my depth.
I want to point out something, which is this argument against coercion, right? And I think the libertarians call it the non-aggression principle, right?
Yes.
Yeah, you know, there's a problem with it, which is you have to imagine. You ever play King of the Mountain when you're a kid, where it's like you're pushing to get to the top of the hill? Well, imagine that you suddenly changed the rules of the game and there was no pushing allowed. One kid got to the top and he said, "Oh, now we can't push anymore." All the richest people in the world have acquired their wealth through brute force. And this is, you know, defenders of capitalism always make it sound like, oh, they were just, you know, inventors tinkering.
They were just lucky.
But the way the
luck.
whole origin of capitalism, I mean, you talk about the transcontinental slave trade, you talk about how this country was acquired from the Native Americans. Even in Europe, you talk about the clearing of the commons and how they threw the peasants off the land and made the land into private property. How after they stole the land from the Native Americans in the United States, they then gave most of it to railroad companies and oil companies. They didn't just give it to every white American based on, you know, whatever their merit or something. It was, you know, that capitalism as a system began with a huge amount of forceful, violent theft. And the 1% of today can trace their roots straight back to the 1% that took power with the overthrow of feudalism. I mean, it is the same circles of wealth and power, I mean, who were, you know, at the time the United States was being founded, they had something in Virginia. They had a group called the House of the Burgesses. You ever heard of this? The House of the Burgesses. Do you know what, Burgess is? That's the English version of the word bourgeois. You know, it was the landowners, it was the slave plantation owners, and that's who were coming together to form the American government, the Burgesses, the landowners, the property class, right? And that capitalism began with a huge amount of violent theft, and it uses state coercion and violent theft to carry out its operations to this day, whether it's, invading Iraq and, the prison industrial complex and all of that. So if we just suddenly now no one can use force for anything. Mm-hmm. How does that fix things? Everything is already in the hands of a small group of people. Everything. I mean, it's not a real solution, right? in an ideal world, yes, we want to create a society. And this is to get to Tyler's question. We want to create a society where there is so much wealth and abundance that people can just live their lives as they want, from each according to their own ability, to each according to their needs. Do what you feel like doing, take what you need. A post-scarcity society. The only way you can have that is there's enough to go around. And that means eliminating capitalism, because the problem with capitalism, the real fundamental problem with capitalism, is that the more wealth that gets created under capitalism, the poorer people get. Self-driving cars should be a great thing, but under capitalism, it would be a nightmare. I give many examples of this. The coal miner's riddle. The father says, the son says to the father, "Why is it so cold?" And the father says, "Because, I can't afford any coal to heat the stove." And he says, "Why can't you afford any coal to heat the stove?" He says, "Because I lost my job at the coal mine." And he says, "Well, father, why did you lose your job at the coal mine?" He said, "Because there's too much coal." Poverty created by abundance. That is the uniqueness of the capitalist system. And that's why we have the boom bust cycle. I mean, John Maynard Keynes, the capitalist economist, he called it underconsumption, but Karl Marx called it what it actually is, which is overproduction. The worker can never afford to buy back what he produces. He's always driving the worker to produce more products than there is wages paid out for the worker to buy back what he produces. So you're frequently going to have a boom bust cycle. And when capitalism was first getting going, it happened every couple of years. Every 2-3 years, they would have a panic. And then they invented all kinds of mechanisms, Federal Reserve Bank, and all kinds of mechanisms to try and stabilize it, but they still couldn't get over this problem. And we had World War I, which came after a number of financial meltdowns and breakdowns. Then we had World War II that came after the Great Depression. Of Wrath. Yeah. And now, as a result of the technological achievements that have happened, the computer revolution, we are in a long-term capitalist crisis, because the technology has taken such a huge leap that the elimination of the worker at the assembly line is something that's like never been seen before. Right. I mean, they don't need workers right now. I mean, you talk about, what is it, this new thing, chat AI or whatever,
Chat GPT.
Right. And in a rational socialist economy, this would be tremendous. It would just mean there's less work for everyone to do. We can, the work that does need to be done, we can assign it, and it would.
We can meet our deadlines a lot faster.
I can tell you guys don't live in Canada.
Well, let me say one quick thing. Let me say one more quick thing about coercion, Rick. And I was thinking about this when I knew I was going to come on here, that the truckers had their bank accounts seized, right?
Not all of them, but they froze some bank accounts for a time.
Okay. Yes. So that's coercion. I would prefer to live in a Christian anarchist society where no one ever does anything like that to each other. There's no greed or use of force.
I don't know what that has to do with capitalism. That's a tool of war. It's economic warfare waged upon the people.
That's what I mean. Until everyone can find the Lord and we can treat each other the way we deserve to be treated, I would love to see the trucker that had their bank account get seized get to face the banker that seized their bank account, just like I would my own children. If one of my kids hits another one, we're going to have to take them aside and we're going to have to explain that hurts people when that's done to you. Okay. And I would like to get that banker in front of a courtroom and be like, "Listen, sir, if you treat those working class truckers that way, you're going to have your bank account seized, and you have a mighty big one, sir."
And those bankers were ordered to do what they did by the government. That's why they seized.
And whose side is that government on? It's the side of the ultra wealthy. It's not on the side of the working class.
Yeah.